So today we have with us Jeff Moss, also known as the Dark Tangent. Jeff is, of course, the legendary founder of the DEF CON conferences and Black Hat conferences. And Jeff is here today because we want to talk a little bit about the history of DEF CON. So Jeff, thank you for coming. And for those of us who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Jeff Moss. I'm known as the Dark Tangent, and I've had that handle for probably 35 years or 40 for a long time. And I'm probably best known for starting DEF CON and the Black Hat security conferences. So it's something I fell into doing. I was a professional penetration tester before that term was invented. And it was something I was kind of doing on the side, throwing the DEF CON party, and it just grew. And same thing, Black Hat was a spin out of DEF CON. And so that was not my master plan. It was not my goal in life, but that's where I ended up. So I ended up doing what I love. And it's been a pretty crazy road. You know, you end up learning a lot of things you never intended to learn, never thought you'd have to learn. And I'm also involved in some policy stuff. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a while, and I was the chief security officer at ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Names and Numbers. And that got me involved in a lot of internet governance issues. And that's something that's really fascinating to me and something I really like to engage in. And so from there, I ended up as a commissioner on the Global Commission for the Stability of Cyberspace. I joined the Council on Foreign Relations. It's just a membership organization, but that's, I think, how I'm balancing my brain between the sort of the technical nitty-gritty of hackers and security and forever bugs, and what does it actually mean in the world? What does this all mean? And that's the other half of my big picture brain, trying to rationalize it all. And so depending upon where you know me, you might know me from the con world, or you might know me from the policy world. One, I wear a suit. One, I wear a t-shirt.
So you said that DEF CON was never your ultimate goal, was never the master plan. How did it all start then? Where did it all come from?
Yeah, I'll tell you the story as best I can remember it. Remember, it's been a while. Human memory isn't perfect, but back in the day, before the internet was popular, it was X25 network, and it was dial-up bulletin boards. FIDO networking was the dominant species in that world. And I had a bulletin board called a dark tangent system, and I was the dark tangent. And this bulletin board system ran, I think it was a Teleguard BBS, and I was networking with about 11 or 12 different networks. Some were phone phreaking, some were piracy, some were hacking, some were whatever it was. And I have had enough jobs, temporary jobs, whatever, that I could pay for my long distance bill, which was rare back then, because remember, you had to pay long distance, and that was expensive. And so networking was expensive. And since I paid for my dial outs to all these FIDO networking hubs, I could be a reliable place to drop off and pick up message bundles. So my bulletin board quickly became a hub for North America for all these networks. And because of that, I was highly connected and talking to a lot of really interesting people. And one of the networks I was connected to was this network called Platinum Net. And it was out of Canada, the guy who organized it. But since I was the North American hub and most of the users were in America, I was the biggest, most important hub. And so I got to know the guy who started it in Canada. And a couple of years went by, and I was now probably ending college, leaving college, and the internet had started, and you could get onto it, but it was kind of difficult. And all of a sudden he says, "Hey, my dad's taking a new job, and we're moving from Canada, and I've got to take down Platinum Net. We should throw a going away party." And I said, "Okay, great, where?" And he said, "Well, nobody's going to want to go to Canada. Most of the users are in the United States. We should organize it in the United States." And I said, "Okay, that sounds like a great idea." And that was it. I never heard from him again. Like, the conversation ended sort of like mid-sentence. And that was it. And If he's tried to reach out to me over the years, I've never gotten a connection. I have no idea what happened to the guy. And but it had planted the seed in my head to throw a party. And so then I said, well, if I was already going to do a party, I may as well try to organize and invite everybody from my other networks. And at about that time, I torched my hard drive for my bulletin board. I had saved up forever, and I bought this $2,000 hard drive. It was 1 gig. It's like 5 1/4 full height. I mean, it's this huge thing, Mac store. And I smoked it. And I was like, not to worry, I have tape backups. Have you ever tried to restore from a quick 40 tape backup? I mean, no. I was totally let down. My backups failed me. The tape backup thing was. So basically, this bulletin board I'd put years and 6 years into my life into building was mostly just gone. I had some floppy drive backups of some config files. So like, well, that's the end of my bulletin board and the thing I poured my life into for years, all through high school and college. But I was still planning this party. So now I started promoting the party on IRC for Pound Hack and Pound Freak and Usenet. And it just forced me to transition to the internet faster. And so then I just started inviting everybody because now it was my party. It wasn't the Platinum Net party or the other party. It was whatever I wanted to make it. And also you have to remember at that time, there's some other hacking parties. There was SummerCon, which was the first one I'd heard of. That was in Atlanta on the East Coast. And that was invite only. And I wasn't elite enough back then to get an invite, but one of my friends he went and he had a blast, told me all these crazy stories and all these hackers you read about in Frack and all these underground zines were there doing crazy stuff. And that, it kind of bothered me that I couldn't go. So I was like, you know what? Anybody can come to mine. Anybody that can come to Vegas will come to mine. So it's going to be not invite only, very intentionally. And also there was also another hacking conference down in Texas run by Drunk Fox called HoHoCon. It happened in Christmas time. And I went to that also. I was planning DEF CON. I don't think DEF CON had happened yet, but it was about to happen. I went there at Christmas, and then my con was coming up in July. And that was also crazy, and I learned a lot from that. And the number one thing I learned was, don't ever throw a convention in a city that closes at 5 o'clock, because by 5:30, the hackers were going crazy, like lighting garbage cans on fire in the hotel, pulling the fire alarms, like they were going crazy, lots of drinking, all of that. And so again, I was like, aha, Las Vegas is a good location, 24-hour city, lots of things to do if you don't like the convention. And back then, I didn't know how many people were going to attend. So I was thinking, if all else fails, I'll be in Vegas. I'll be broke, but I'll be in Vegas. Never been to Vegas before. And it'll be a big story, a big adventure, and I'll figure it out. Because it wasn't that much money. Even if it crashed and burned, it was like I was out $1,000 or $2,000. It wasn't too bad in the scheme of things.
Well, it's good to know that not a lot has changed. These conferences still get pretty rowdy. But of course, I'm sure a lot has changed as well. For those of us who haven't been to any of the early ones, what was it like? What was the atmosphere like in one of the earlier DEF CONs?
So that first one was, we didn't know what to expect, didn't know a thing about running a convention, and I didn't really know how to invite anybody. So what I did is I sent out a ton of emails. I had a call for papers, I believe, but it was really a lot of word of mouth. And so if you look at that first DEF CON list of speakers, it was pretty awesome. We had Dan Farmer, who was like the Unix god. Everybody wanted to be Dan Farmer. Everybody wanted Dan Farmer's job. He was essentially the security guy at Sun Microsystems. And he gave a talk, and he was saying, how they have more and more systems at Sun, and it's too time consuming to try to secure them all. So he's thinking about writing essentially scripts and ways of scanning his network to find problems, to find vulnerabilities, then he can use, like a security analysis network, attack thing. And maybe I'll call it Satan. And what do you know? 6, 7 months later, he releases his tool, Satan, gets him on the cover of Time magazine, and that starts the whole automated scanning for vulnerabilities thing, right? We had Gail Thackeray, who was famous back then. She participated in this Operation Sun Devil, which was the first big sort of federal organized push against software pirates from Maricopa County in Arizona.
Mhm.
And so we figured, well, there's so much bullshit in the underground back then, because there wasn't Google, there wasn't Amazon, there weren't a lot of sources of truth. So everything spread by word of mouth, and it always got embellished. And pretty soon, all the things you heard were nonsense.
Mhm.
And so the whole point of that first one is like, let's hear it from the horse's mouth. Let's hear it from Dan Farmer. Let's hear it from the prosecutor. Let's hear about it from a lawyer, Curtis Carnell. Let's hear about it from an EFF attorney or CPSR, Judy. And you quickly find out that reality is different when you hear it from the people who do it for a living, right? It was funny. One of the speakers was supposed to speak, but he was busy being prosecuted by Gail Thackeray, the other speaker. And so now they're in a different state and everything, but that made him so intimidated that he decided not to speak. And it turned out to be crazy,
Mhm.
crazy time.
There's also a very unique vibe that's sort of developing, starting from the first DEF CON. This unique aesthetic, visual aesthetic.
Yeah.
What guides the development of this? What guided and influenced the development of this aesthetic?
Yeah. So it was originally, I love comic books, and one of my favorite comic book authors / artists was Shiro Mazumi, who wrote Appleseed and then wrote Ghost in the Shell and Black Magic and a series. And so he had a very techno future vision of sort of Japan, but it wasn't always Japan. It was just an unnamed sort of city. And that really influenced me. And so you'll see in all those early years of the DEF CON program, when I was making the program, before I had anybody helping really, I used a lot of imagery from Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell, maybe Mad Max, and I mean Max Headroom, and those kind of future punk, techno punk kind of cyberpunk vision, because we were sort of living at that time. Like you could do things. You knew people who literally had taken over the phone switch for a city, or had infiltrated a whole X25 network and had remote admin privileges. So the stories kind of rang true because we were living that cyberpunk future right then. Individual kids had the power. And also at that time, there really wasn't any consequences because nothing was really at risk. Banks weren't really online. There's no Amazon, none of that stuff. And so you could run rampant, but you couldn't really hurt anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the ethos back then was really look but don't touch. And so it was kind of a naive, free flow. And I think the art reflected that. It was a little bit like we used to have slogans on the back of our shirts. And one of them, it was when we were growing up and the .com boom was happening, everybody had to clean up their reputation. The back of the shirt that year said, "I miss crime." And the joke was that everybody pretended they were never a hacker. Everybody's a security professional. And, the .com forced this huge culture change.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were poking fun of it with that shirt.
You mentioned this naive free flow. Are there any memorable talks from those early cons that you think represent this vibe or represent this mentality? Or any talks from the early days that you find interesting?
Yeah, there's a lot. Because back then the show was small enough, I could actually see the talks. But there was one, Dead Addict gave a talk at the first DEF CON, and he's talking about how once broadband comes along and we're no longer on dial-up modems, and your computer is always connected 24 hours a day, that means the bad guys can get to your computer 24 hours a day. And that's going to change everything. And I went back, I think I listened to that talk 5 years ago, and it's like, yep, everything he predicted basically would happen. A lot of those early talks were a decade too soon. Curtis Carnow gave a talk about where's the liability in agents? Like, let's say back then there's all this talk about agents that would go out and potentially shop for you. And you tell the agent, I want a blue sweater. And your agent would go crawl the web somehow and get you the best deal on a blue sweater, was the thinking. But if the bot makes a mistake and buys an expensive sweater, whose fault is it? Like the bot designer, yours, And so where does the liability lie in these autonomous agents? That was like 25 years ago. And here we are, just starting to have those issues. So yeah, a lot of the early talks were fascinating. I think some of the early crazy stuff, though, was more like interactions with the hotel, or when we would have researchers that were threatened by companies to pull their research. This was, the industry didn't know really what to make of us, law enforcement. We were kind of new on the scene, and everybody was trying to adapt. And so publications didn't know how to cover us. When we started hacking locks, the locksmiths hated us, probably still do, right? But they were all out against us. Lock manufacturers hated us. Later on, it was access control. It was automakers. Anytime we venture into somebody else's territory with our hacking gaze, they get hyper defensive, right? The toll payment systems for metros, whatever it is.
Yeah. Are there any crazy stories that you can share from those early days?
I remember DEF CON 1 was pretty smooth because it was just one room. And the people who showed up at the first DEF CON were pretty, they were into it. Whatever the announcement said, they were going to go there and experience that. The second con, word of mouth had spread, and we went from like 100 people to maybe 300 people or so. But by the third con, that one made me think maybe this isn't such a good idea. Because by the third con, there was enough people that were just along for the ride to cause chaos, that they were breaking shit. There were definitely some troublemakers. And more than just normal shenanigans, right? They were like doing stuff that could potentially have the hotel arrest them, and stealing microphones and breaking into the bars and pouring themselves drinks and, stuff that's kind of shenanigans. But like I said, but then there was this guy. That was a year. So, you have those PA systems where they would page people over the thing. And they would also have these bingo rooms, I guess, where you would have these stamps and you stamp out your numbers and they'd call out these numbers over this PA system. Well, this one phone phreaker guy goes in and total, knows no fear. Just goes in, walks into the staff only door, opens up the next door he sees, goes down some steps. He's in the basement. He's wandering around some basement. He opens a door. He's in the IT center. It's at night. Nobody's there. He sits down. He gets on the console and he just starts hacking the phone system. And he prints out a list of every extension in the whole hotel. Prints it out, grabs it, leaves. And so he gives me a copy, or he gives me the extension after they've gone through it. They've already had fun with it for a day or so, and it's toward the end of the con. And he gives me this list. I'm like, oh, it was you. And what they were doing is they would know, like, if I call this one extension, I'm in the PA system in the room where they're doing the bingo thing. So they just call that extension and be like, B32, C7, and just say random stuff. Paging IP spoofer, Mr. IP spoofer, and they would just take over the intercom system for the hotel and just do all kinds of pranks. But as you stack up enough of those things, and the hotel starts to get a little nervous.
How much of that becomes part of the ethos of DEF CON?
Yeah.
And comes back every year?
Those stories, like there was one year, about around that time, DEF CON 3, DEF CON 4, definitely by 5, the conference had gotten big enough that I couldn't know everything that was happening anymore. It was bigger than me. And I remember that had a big emotional impact on me, because it's sort of like, hey, this is my party. These are all my friends helping me run it, but I'm not experiencing it all anymore. There's too many things happening in too many places that I have to hear the stories from people. And I'm okay with that now. But at that point, it was something to get over. Like, you had to be okay with that. Just like you have to be okay knowing that you're always going to allow people in, or you're always going to grow, or, it's a fork in the road. But if you're not okay with not knowing everything that's going on, you're going to have to cap attendance. So there was one year, it was particularly destructive year. But I want to tell you the story just because visually I find it's the best story visually for me to tell. So I can't remember the name of the hotel. And people, if you went into the elevator and they didn't screw in their elevator panel. I don't know why, but they didn't use any screws. So if you pressed up against the elevator panel and slid it up, you could pull the whole elevator panel off, spin it around, and then people would just cross connect all the buttons and then put the panel back. So you had no idea where you were going, right? Total shenanigans. And I remember there was also the scavenger hunt was going on. And one of the scavenger hunt items was a door from a telco van. Didn't matter if it was GTE or AT&T, it was just a telco van. And so I remember I'm sitting there in the lobby, it's late, it's like probably 1 a.m, and I'm talking to someone and I'm waiting for the elevator, and ding, the elevator door opens. And there is a GTE door just in the elevator by itself. Like, that's the door prize for the scavenger hunt. Like, not getting in there. Ding, closes. Ding, next door opens. It's the satellite dish from the roof of the hotel, right? The hotel next door couldn't process any credit cards, apparently, because their satellite system was down. Okay, door closes, so they're having a lot of fun with the elevators. Well, on one of the floors, they were wiring in new smoke detectors. And so when you got off the elevator and you look down those, those big long hallways you'd have in Vegas, you'd look straight down this hallway and they had all the smoke detectors like half hanging out. Like the electrician had strung them in, but they're hanging, a foot or two from the ceiling, waiting to be mounted in the ceiling. And it's late and it's party time, and somebody comes skipping down the hallway, do 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 do, and he jumps up in the air, grabs the smoke detector closest to the elevator, throws it in the elevator, and presses the down button. Doors close on the smoke detector with the cable and goes down.
Oh my
and
gosh.
it starts pulling out all the smoke detectors, like a chain, like it'd smash one into the ceiling, pop, and the smoke detector would fall in the street. And then the next one, pop, and it just ripped out the smoke detectors down the whole hallway.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like something from a movie, but like I said, some of the stuff was pretty destructive, and I never got a bill for it. The hotel never brought it up. It was never mentioned. And that's when I realized they must be making so much money that they don't care. Or to us, that seems really destructive, but maybe that's kind of normal in Vegas, as far as I know. So I asked them one year and I said, hey, where do we rate in the destructiveness scale? And they said, you're not as bad as the American Heart Association. Like I said, wait a minute, the American Heart Association, oh yeah, they would get drunk and they would, in the cafeteria, they would stand on the back of the chairs, they'd jump up and they'd swing on the chandelier and rip the chandelier out of the ceiling. Okay, maybe we're not, that's when I realized that Vegas has seen a little bit of everything. And we might like to think we have a bad boy image, but maybe not so much bad boy.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a little, might be a little deflating if people found out that the American Heart Association
was trashing the joint a little bit more. But on the other hand, we were much more creative. I remember in the early days, the PBX system, I mean, when they switched to these new telephony systems that were all VoIP, you could unplug the phone and plug into the network, and then people were scanning the network and using the VoIP network to do whatever they wanted. And another thing is they would unscrew the pay TV box, and they'd bypass the box, and then they could watch whatever they wanted without paying. Well, one of the things they were doing is the hotel back then wasn't filtering broadcast messages, because that's how they passed signaling around. And so hackers, total nerds, there was a whole like underground chat system in the hotel room of people sending broadcast messages, and then people decoding the broadcast messages, and in the packets for broadcast they were having conversations. And so like you go to the con and there's a subculture of a hotel room hacker subculture that's doing a messaging subculture, and it's crazy. Makes me smile.
Yeah. Speaking of subcultures, one of the things that DEF CON is really famous for is the villages, right? And was this something that you guys, is this something that you all conceived at DEF CON? Or was it something that preceded DEF CON? How did it all develop?
Yeah. So the con was growing and it was growing, and we outgrew Alexis Park and we're getting bigger, but we could only add so many speaking tracks, and there were parties, and we just couldn't see it being sustainable forever. Like we didn't know what the next thing was. We should probably think about something else. We've got sort of the capture the flag was kind of going, and that was in a sort of like anything goes chill out space. And so there was capture the flag, and there's some people beating up each other on the conference network. And then I think the first unofficial village before it was a village was the hardware hacking village. And those guys just started hacking on hardware. And Russ Rogers, Speed Russer, looked at it all, and he was like, well, we've got this and we've got that, but we sort of have these clusters of groups of people doing something. What if we fostered that and made it more of a thing instead of just organically happening? We sort of give people the rough guidelines on how to do it. And the idea was, what do we call it? Was it a village? Was it a tribe? Was it a pod? Was it a, and we just stuck with the villages. And that idea was smash hit. You know, now every con has a village. And a lot of the villages that come to DEF CON now go to many. Some have turned it into a profession or a job. You know, you see them at all kinds of conferences around the world. So yeah, the idea had some legs, and it's taken people a long distance.
Yeah. So another thing that DEF CON is really famous for is the badges. That's another idea that sort of grew.
Yeah.
And I think today they're all digital and really unique. But I think I read that the first one you said was printed, was using a laser printer.
Oh, the first badge, God damn that badge. It was like color printing using CorelDRAW. And I remember it to this day. What was it? It was a fiery printer that could do dye sublimation, continuous tone printing. And there was like one of them in Seattle, and that I could buy time on it and print. And you know, if you look at that badge now, it looks pretty terrible, but that was a color, you know, continuous tone badge printed out, and then I hand laminated them all and stuck these clips on them. And that started this crazy downward spiral of always trying to outdo yourself with the badges. And then quickly learned that people would counterfeit the badges. So you'd always try to stick something in there to make it a little bit harder to counterfeit or a little bit tricky. So one year, when color printers were the thing, I had this Canon color printer. But Canon that year, for this one model, made special ink packs, and one of them was fluorescing black ink. And so I printed that badge. All the black was actually fluorescent, and you wouldn't know unless you hit it with a black light. And so if people cloned it, they wouldn't know, right? So we had little black lights, we'd shine them on the badges if we thought it was counterfeit. So yeah, it totally started this whole cat and mouse, which then turned into this badge counterfeiting contest. Same idea. If you're not going to beat them, join them. So we invited them to turn it into a contest. because they were counterfeiting it anyway, and they were showing off their badges. I never got to see them, and I really wanted to see them. And so if it's a contest, I can go in there and see the winners. And so, and then it also led to this tamper evident contest I started, which was, I was driving around in a taxi, and they have our power meters. You see those little lead crimped seals that prevent you from opening up the power meter or the taxi cab counter. And I was like, I wonder how hard that is to counterfeit. And I don't know much about it, but hackers do. Somebody somewhere knows about it. So I'll just throw a contest and see what happens. And so I read all I could, which is not much because it's not very publicly known. Bought every seal I could find commercially, which wasn't that many, brought them all and let everybody attack it. And it was, within a number of years, it's like everything has failed, everything can be defeated. And that contest is now orders of magnitude more complicated than I ever could make it. But by planting that seed, it completely exposed a whole new area of physical security that was, underexplored.
Yeah, and then those things become their own part of the ethos or their own village or their own thing. I wanted to ask you, speaking of badges and the ethos, on a little tangent maybe, how did you all come up with the logo, originally the logos of DEF CON?
Yeah, the Scully.
Yeah.
We call him Jack and we call him Scully. It was totally accidental, pretty much. And I think it was DEF CON 3. And I had a small business, I had a couple people working for me, and one of the guys loved doing 3D renderings. And I wanted to have a poster that year. I wanted a DEF CON poster, like a movie poster. The Dark Tangent presents DEF CON 3. And so he rendered this like robot, and we made the background was like a big circuit board, and we had the DEF CON voice bridge back then. So we had a barcode with the number of the DEF CON voice bridge. And we really needed some sort of icons. And so I said, we need some logos, or we need something to put down here to balance it out, or we need some sort of symbol on the robot or whatever. And so we started talking about what's the imagery of like, well, hackers, phone freaks, software pirates. And we talked about it for a little bit. Well, a couple days later, he shows up. Steve-O shows up, and he's creating me. He's like, well, the floppy disk, I guess, for pirates, and phone is for the phone freaks, and the skull and crossbones, I guess, pirates also. That's kind of like the disk pirate, but whatever. And then, and he just invented the 3 logos, and they were perfect. And so we used them ever since. And recently we added a 4th one. We added a lock. The Lost Boy created. So now we have 4 symbols. This lock picking in the physical security was sort of missing.
Yeah, and we touched earlier about the whole aesthetics of it. There's actually a theme, there's direction. With every DEF CON, there's a specific visual guide and specific theme. How involved are you in the direction of every one of these themes?
Yeah, I obsess over all of it. And luckily, Sleestack who runs our social media was a film critic, did film reviews, and has this crazy, almost photographic memory for all things sort of social, cultural, music, movies, books, whatever. And so I can give him an idea. I'll be like, okay, Shockwave Rider, The Worm. That's the Shockwave Rider book was the first time a computer worm. The term was invented in that book. Anti-authoritarian, going against the think tanks, and he'll put that in his brain, he'll mix it all up, connect it to 3 other movies, and spit out a brilliant paragraph, right? And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll write a paragraph and he'll refine it, or he'll write a paragraph and I'll change it. And between the 2 of us, we can get pretty close to what I'm trying to envision. And over the years, I've gotten better and better at delegating and letting him have a little bit more leeway with it. But I think there's definitely some value with having a single vision, whether my vision is right or wrong, instead of vision by committee. You know, I would
Mhm.
much rather have a single vision, like a director.
Mhm.
Like the director, hate the director. At least you're getting the director's vision. But I don't want to have the vision by committee. You know, oh, you didn't ask about the music aesthetics, but we spent a lot of time in the early days. It was all very techno, and then later on, it's gotten more live music. And it's interesting because we've seen the birth of um, nerdcore, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, nerdcore came, and it's funny because in Japan or in Hong Kong or even when we were in China, people refer to that music like while they're programming and this techno music is going. We've heard people in their hacking groups refer to that as DEF CON music.
Really?
Like, yeah, it's like it's not DEF CON's music, but it's a theme. It's the style of music that's played at DEF CON that they have like associated with their hacking. And so we've had apparently a big influence in sort of the music section of hacking, and we didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I think dual core is a name of a rapper that was
Yeah,
pretty popular.
I
Still
mean,
is
I
relevant.
remember the first year he was at DEF CON, I'm walking by and I'm like, there's a dude standing in the corner, like rapping as people walk past him. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? So I said, that takes a lot of courage. And so I stand there and I watch him, and he's got like a table set up and some guys, you know, playing and he was good. And every year, better, better, better albums, you know, stage presence, everything. And that was like watching the birth and development of dual core in 80.
Yeah. So earlier you'd mentioned the idea that if you can't beat them, join them. And, you know, we talked about some of the chaos that ends up taking part and is naturally a part of this. But we're also talking about, on the other hand, how it's all directed and there's a lot of structure to it at the same time. And it all strikes me as kind of this well-managed chaos.
Yeah. Well, every year, one of the goons mentioned every year, everybody's amazed that it happens. Because everybody sees the total kind of shit show behind it, right? It is chaos is a good word. And so one of the reasons we're hoping to do it again this year in person, even if it's super small, a couple thousand people, and we just sit around the swimming pool, is that you have to exercise your chaos muscles every year. And if we go 2 or 3 years without doing a physical con, it will be really, really hard to do one again.
Mhm.
So.
So compared to today, what did it take in the early days to produce something like DEF CON?
Back then, I was really inspired by these magazines, Mondo 2000, there's 2600. I believe there was maybe even, wasn't sure if Blacklisted 411 was out then or they came out later. And then there was another magazine, I think came out a little bit later, Adbusters. What was another one? Anyway, there's a slew of this sort of e-zine world was exploding, right? Desktop publishing, a lot of zines were coming out, a lot of alternative voices and different perspectives. It was really inspiring. And so when we made that first program for DEF CON, it was made with like a Logitech handheld scanner and a laser printer, which was all new stuff. And that allowed me to produce materials that looked a little bit more professional, that whole desktop publishing thing. And luckily I had a friend, as I started to plan this, I had a friend from my bulletin board days, a dead addict. And he was living with some people who had a laser printer. And so I'd go to his place and use his printer and we'd hang out and I'd bounce some ideas off of him. And so it's good at the very beginning to have someone else to get their feedback. And I had a whole pool of people from the bulletin board days, but he was local, he was close to me. So it was one of the only people from the bulletin board days that was there.
You invited or you sent faxes to the FBI and the CIA. You thought they might as well, they'll find out.
Right. So yeah, right. The faxes, because a lot of it was faxes back then. Like we would get the fax numbers to every publication, every magazine we could find, New Media magazine. I was writing little stories or little pieces for New Media magazine. So anywhere we could, we tried to get an advertisement placed or get them to mention us as an upcoming event. And I was like, well, the feds are going to come. I may as well just invite them, right? I already invited a prosecutor. How do you invite the feds? So I wrote a fax, basically just saying, hey, this is my name, Jeff Moss. I'm throwing this party, DEF CON. It's going to be for a bunch of hackers. It's going to be in Las Vegas. Love to have you come and speak. Come on down. Sent off the fax to whatever I found for the Las Vegas, FBI agency, whatever. Don't hear back. Now about a month goes by. It's getting a little bit closer, and so I call them up, and I get the receptionist, and I say who I am. I'm doing this party. I sent this fax. I'm trying to find out if They're like, oh, okay, let us transfer you to the agent, special agent in charge of the office, whatever the guy's name is. So he transfers me in. Ring, ring. Phone picks up. This is special agent so and so. I'm like, hi, yes, I'm Jeff Moss, and I sent you this thing. And blah 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 blah. Hacker conference. I'd love to have you. And there's this big, long, pregnant pause. I still remember to this day. It's a big, long pause. We are aware of your activities. I'm like, oh, good. Okay, yeah. So you're coming, right? And then that kind of broke him down. He's like, no, I'd love to come. Sounds fun, but you're asking for somebody to talk about policy, and we're enforcement, and we can't talk about policy. He was really nice and forwarded us off to DC. Nothing ever happened. But at the end of the first DEF CON, when it was all over and we're cleaning up, the whole con happened in like one room, and it was all cleaning up and it was kind of over. The guy came up to me and said, hey, I'm special agent blah blah blah, and he lifts up his shirt, shows me his badge. I'm with the FBI. I was like, hey, I thought you guys said you weren't going to come. It's like, oh, well, we couldn't speak, but we were interested, in what was happening. And I'm convinced to this day that kind of friendly beginning, banter, whatever, breaking of the ice, showing that they were welcome because they're going to show up anyway, really set the tone. That it was a sort of non-confrontational. It was more cat and mouse maybe, but it wasn't like aggressive. And it grew from there. And then other agencies and other departments and other countries, other people from other nations sending their secret spy people. But it was all going to happen anyway. And so we just tried to gamify it, and we turned it into that spot the Fed game. Try to lower the tension over it, and to also sort of say like, hey, you're not fooling anybody. We know you're going to be here. It's not like you're going to sneak up on us and, oh my, we didn't realize it. There could be undercover agents.
I still hear about Spot the Fed today. A lot of people still play it. I assume this is another thing that has changed.
Yeah.
Was it different in the old days? The guy didn't tell you that he is a Fed until after the event. What was it like to spot the Feds back in the day?
I think back then Feds were wearing, nicer shoes, and they always kind of had, the haircut. It wasn't very crazy. And then once the word was out on that, all the Feds sent people that looked normal after that. Within a couple of years, you couldn't tell. All the tells went away. The penny loafers, and then for a while it was that they wore the little what's it, like the butt sack, the little thing you clip around your waist fanny pack, and because in the fanny pack they'd have their badge and their gun if they were law enforcement. So you just look for people that had fanny packs, and then you'd eyeball the fanny pack really closely and see if it held a gun, because you could tell that make and model. And so then of course they caught on to that. But yeah, it's been a fun adventure there.
So are there still tells, or how do you spot Feds today, or are they just not bothering to hide it?
Yeah, well, the Feds now that we do spot, for a while there, it was the Feds were outing each other because they wanted to get the swag. So one Fed from one agency would try to out, a friend or whatever competitor from another agency. But then it's kind of turned into this bigger, more nation state thing. And a few years ago, we were at one of my friends works with DEF CON. We're at Bally's, or maybe it was Paris, one of the two. And he's looking around. Okay, is everybody having a good time? Is there a problem? Is it bottlenecks in the hallway? And he sees this guy. He's kind of got this like serious look on his face. And my friend's like, that guy's not having a good time. Something must be wrong. Like, did he lose something? Is he trying to find what's going on? And then he's looking at him for a little bit. And he's like, oh, no, he's working. He's doing something. This is work for him. And so he starts eyeballing the guy. It's this Chinese looking guy, and he has a backpack on with a pouch. On the pouch, for like a phone or something, but the pouch has a hole in it, and it's got a camera in it. And the guy's standing in the middle of the hallway, and he's just recording everybody coming and going up and down the hallway. And he's like, okay, that's not cool. I'm going to go get somebody. And as he goes to get some goons to try to kick the guys out, he notices another one of them. Another guy dressed the same way, same backpack, same everything, recording another area. So it turned out that we heard from some law enforcement that there are some foreign nationals trying to record everybody that looks like they're anybody in information security.
Yeah. So of course you work with the topic of governance now. So I'm sure you meet feds as part of this work. Do you ever get anybody talk to you about the old days or some DEF CON that they'd attended?
A little bit. There's this one guy who he passed away a few years ago, but he was the very first Fed spotted at DEF CON, worked for the NSA, and he was a great guy, totally upfront and everything. And I remember when after a few years, must have been around DEF CON 4 or 5, and we had our capture the flag started, which turned into a thing, right? Everybody has a capture the flag now, but DEF CON was the first that I know of in this organized area. And Ken was like, hey, do you mind if we take your idea and start a contest internally? It's like, well, anybody can do this, so sure, that would be great. But it's really interesting to see that the professionals that do this for a living came to DEF CON and ended up getting inspired to try something new, at the NSA, at wherever they were. And you just sort of had such a huge picture of them build up in your mind that they knew everything and did everything. And then when you see a little bit of the curtain pulled back, you're like, oh, okay, they're just like us, trying to find new ideas, trying to do something new.
Yeah, DEF CON certainly had an impact, not just in the Fed community, but also on the industry. And vice versa. I remember you were talking in an interview about the .com bubble,
right?
And how things have changed at DEF CON as a result. How people suddenly were talking about, instead of talking about exploits, they were talking about stocks and benefits.
Right. How many restricted stock units do you have, and what are your ISO shares like? And it's like, what's going on here? Because I wasn't in that world. I wasn't participating in that so much. And so, and if you look back who attended that first DEF CON, it was artists. One of the people I met was a lawyer who then helped me get an internship. I was an intern at Capitol Records at Hollywood and Vine between DEF CON 1 and DEF CON 2, because Whitney, I met at DEF CON 1, and he's like, hey, you should come on down. And I was attending law school at the time. And so I worked in the legal department. And then I got to read all these awesome artist files of, Tina Turner and MC Hammer or whatever, the Beatles. And then lawyers and artists. And then from there, you could see how I'd sort of created a trap for myself. And it was unintentional, but it was a trap. And you could see the end game coming. I can still see it coming. I haven't fully reached it, but it goes something like this. There's like 2 forks in the road. One is, are you invite only or are you not? And this is to that SummerCon issue. And I decided, no, I'm not going to be elitist like that. If you can get your ass to Vegas, you can come to the show. Okay. So if you're not restricting people, you're going to grow. So the second fork in the road is, do you cap attendance? And if you cap attendance, you can sort of maybe keep it under control. But I was always worried that who are you rewarding if you cap attendance? Or then you have to do pre-registration. And if you have to do pre-registration, now I've got your name, your number, and your credit card. And I don't want your name, number, and credit card. I want it to be somewhat anonymous. So we've tried to be always accommodating, and it leads, so you get this privacy benefit, but it's really hard for us to plan. And so it's a trap, right? You have to pick one or the other.
where are we on this journey today? I mean, you saw it go from underground to kind of little corporate,
Yeah.
but we're way past the .com bubble.
Yeah. So now I think we're in this, like when I started, I think DEF CON was one of 4 conferences that I knew of in North America. You know, there was HoHoCon, SummerCon, PumpCon had just started right before for Halloween, right before DEF CON. So DEF CON and PumpCon kind of started at the same time. HoHoCon had been around for a couple of years, and SummerCon had been around for a bunch of years. And that was all I knew of. I'm sure there might have been some other ones, but that was it. Now I think there's hundreds. If you count all the B-sides and local and regional, and there's hundreds and hundreds of cons. And so I always assume that at some point we're going to top out, we'll reach as many people are interested in this, will come to Vegas, and it'll just naturally reach a point, a stasis. It'll be whatever the number is, 20,000 people, 30,000 people, but that's it. Because there's too many other attractive options too close to home. And every year we've grown. Some years not by much, but we haven't hit that point yet, even with a record number of conferences around the world. So then you look at like, well, okay, what are these conferences doing? And we're all essentially the same thing. DEF CON just happens to be bigger and maybe more diverse, but we're all offering essentially the same thing. But about 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, maybe, I've really started to try to draw this distinction between HackerCon and infosec, because somewhere along the road, everything got mixed up together. Hacking became infosec, infosec became hacking, and it's all become a giant blur. And I don't think that's healthy. And so, so I'm trying to figure out how do you highlight hacking. And there's a million infosec cons you can go to, but I want DEF CON to be more focused on that original hacking. And so when I talk about that, I say things like, I want it to be something that encourages creativity. I want it to be sort of spontaneous exploration. Like you see somebody sit down that's never picked a lock, they fiddle around with the lock pops open, their eyes are like saucers, and they're like, holy crap, I just opened up the lock. That kind of discovery that somebody told you this lock is secure, and look, it's not. And that doesn't necessarily help in your infosec job, right? Hacking Xbox, building a widget, whatever, a pie hole, that doesn't help in your day job. But the idea is that there's 2 sides there. There's like the infosec side that gets you paid, and you need certain enterprise skills to keep out the bad guys, whatever. And then there's sort of hacking, which is more of this creative problem solving, failing, making friends, doing crazy shit. And the 2, I think, complement each other. And I just want to draw a bigger distinction and do what I can to make DEF CON more hacker.
Yeah, I mean, there's also an element of counter culture, I think, that's present. I think I see present in the hacker community that's useful, that's beneficial.
Yeah.
So if the current mainstream culture is too corporate, the counter culture element to it is a useful thing.
Yeah, you know, for me, it's always, I can't enumerate it exactly, but I know one of the big elements is speak truth to power. It's admit when you make a mistake. It's don't be afraid to fail. It's don't judge a book by its cover, right? We didn't have cameras. We only had text when we made friends originally in the old school days. And so you didn't care what country or accent or hair color people had. You know, maybe that's a problem now, but in the early days, you couldn't really judge anybody because you only could judge by what was on the screen in front of you.
Yeah, it was quite exciting, actually. It felt like a out of body experience. Like you're.
Well, I was like 13, 14 years old, and I was on these bulletin boards talking with adults, and they didn't know I was a kid. And I couldn't drive a car, and I couldn't vote, and I couldn't drink, but I could talk to people in Canada, Russia, Germany, wherever online. And it really was empowering. And then you go to school, and there are all these dorks at school, and everybody's talking about what I felt were very small, teeny issues. And then I'd go home and and the whole world would open up again, you know, for me in the evening when I got online. And it was just this big
It
dichotomy.
messes up your sleep schedule. I would stay up.
All night.
Yeah, I mean, so this vibe, the feel of it. How do you take a 30,000 people conference and you make it like that? Or can you at all?
Yeah. One of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about is how do we, you go to a con, there's 30,000 people, but how do you get people in a manageable human size group? And so everything you do, you see us, we're trying to split you off and narrow the herd kind of. So it's like you're into hands-on things, we have villages for you. You're into physical security, we have these 6 villages for you. You're into locks, we have these 2 villages for you. You're into combination locks, you're into this one thing. Next thing you know, you're sitting at a table with 9 other people. There's 30,000 people there, but you're with 9 other people saying, hey, how does this work?
Mhm.
You know, and it's that kind of thing. Soldering tables, you know, you got 6 people on the table, and hopefully you'll talk to them and they'll teach you their techniques. And so it's like, how do you make it human and accessible?
Yeah. What was the year for you that you felt that DEF CON is a big deal?
Right. Yeah, probably around 7, DEFCON 6 or 7, because the numbers started getting big enough that you're like, oh, okay, we're bringing enough people now to the hotel that they're paying attention to us. Because the joke is, and it was true, every year for a number of years, we had to change hotels because we kept getting kicked out or the hotel was being imploded or demolished until we landed at the Alexis Park. And then we got to stay at the Alexis Park for a number of years until, like I said, we outgrew it, kind of got kicked out. And after that, we were big enough that we could command attention, and then we could get like a whole part of a hotel. And then we did our rounds through Vegas until we started needing multiple hotels. And then once you get into that game, there's only a couple players in Vegas that have multiple hotels you can do this at. So
Yeah, and DEF CON is happening in other countries outside the US now.
yeah, we had this great connection for a couple of years with the Tribeca Film Festival. And that was back when Mr. Robot had just started, and Mr. Robot wanted to do something special. And we knew some of the people at Tribeca, and they said, hey, maybe you can have some real hackers. So we had this, for 2 years, we had this Tribeca Film Festival, DEF CON sort of crossover. And when we were doing that, we're like, well, it is possible to do a mini DEF CON. So maybe we could do something else somewhere in another country. And for years, for a decade or more, we always had thought that there was no place that we could ever do another DEF CON. It was Vegas, and that was it. If we went to the East Coast and tried to do a con every 6 months, you'd probably burn out, and you'd be robbing your own kind of attendance. And plus, you'd be stepping on all the cons that were on the East Coast now. There's a lot going on the East Coast, and that would be kind of rude. So then we're like, well, Germany has a ton of hackers. But Germany has the oldest hacking conference in the world, Chaos Computer Club. And they've got a lot of good conferences there. So you sit there and you make a list, and you're thinking, well, who's got a lot of technology? Who has a lot of hackers that could potentially understand English or are into hacking that you could grow there for a number of years. And you do the numbers and you're like, Brazil, maybe, Africa, not yet. And you whittle it right down to India or China that haven't been saturated by other cons. And so we had a good connection with one of the companies in China that really wanted to try it. And so we gave China a try. And it turns out China is, I mean, they're sort of like, when we started, they were in their dot-com boom moment. So when we started, I think 4 years ago in China, they were like in their year 3 of the dot-com boom. And so they have all these old school hackers, we would consider old school hackers, but they're just in their moment right now. They're like 5, 6, 7, 8 years into their moment. Like we were achieving that back in 2003 or something, but they're achieving it now. So it's always fascinating because the problems they have, the things they're doing, it's sort of like us 15 years ago. So, they're all about community. They're all about, defending against the bad guys. They're super hungry to meet other people and make connections and learn something new and show off their new thing. And that's really kind of refreshing. And Beijing is like the hardest place you could hold a conference in China for foreigners, just because it's sort of like holding, somebody said it's like holding a spy conference in DC. It's just really hard to do. But if you get the approvals, then you're good.
And China doesn't strike me as the kind of country that would gravitate towards this type of chaos or the things that happen at DEF CON.
Yeah, but it doesn't quite happen like that in China. Maybe it does at rock concerts or something, but their culture is different and more orderly, I guess. But you have to remember, so in the States, we have a lot of spare time essentially in junior high and high school. And then we go to college and we get really, really busy. So I learned a lot of my hacking and programming and everything was in my junior high and high school. But for a lot of Asian countries, China included, your high school or primary is really busy. You don't have a lot of time for your hobbies. You have more time for your hobbies when you're in college. And so the time at which they have freedom to explore and tinker happens at a different point in their life than it does for us. And that leads to different outcomes. And the other thing is they don't have, or they didn't have, this huge, just random upswelling of domestic creation of security products. They pretty much are dominated by giant mega players. So it turns out that it's like, it would be sort of like if you worked for Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, or Google, and those are the four. And if you didn't work for those four, they're all in competition. So if you work for Apple, then that means you're in competition with Microsoft, right? You automatically have an enemy if you work for, and it's a little bit like that in China. If you work for, Alibaba, you're sort of in competition with JD, so on and so forth. And so you definitely need to have the buy-in from the powers that be. But as soon as you do, everybody knows, it's okay. It's okay to go to this because so-and-so is sponsoring. And if they're sponsoring, then it's a good thing. I can tell you these crazy stories about why their companies have such these incredible offensive teams. And it's because when you dig down to the bottom of that story, I need to write a more detailed blog post about this, but essentially what happened is one company broke into another company. And the company that was broken into essentially turned to the government and said, hey, company A just busted into us. And the government said, hey, you're a big company. You're a big boy. Like, you can't take care of yourself? The implication meaning that we've given these mega companies a lot of latitude. We expect you to be able to take care of yourself. If you're coming to us asking for us to take care of things for you, then maybe you shouldn't be so big and dominant, is sort of the implication. So they weaponized, right? They created an offensive team to retaliate against the company that broke into them. And all the other players on the sidelines were looking around like, what's going on? Everybody's weaponizing. So everybody built offensive teams. So now you have these mega offensive teams being paid as sort of deterrents against each other. But that's not making any money and it's costing a lot of money. So what do you do with them? So then the marketing department took them and started using them to gain attention to their company. So you would notice that Pwn to Own, all the winning teams every year were Chinese teams. Well, why is that? Well, they've got 20 people on payroll doing nothing all year round except sharpening their knives and getting better at breaking into stuff. And pretty soon, they were so dominant that a couple of American researchers, they don't have a budget for 20 people for 9 months to come up with a new exploit chain. There's no way you can't compete against a team with a yearly budget. So the foreigners basically stopped competing or really reduced their participation. And then it looked like the Chinese were totally dominant. And then they would win and there'd be all these press announcements. And yeah, it's when you dig underneath, it's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, so it becomes some sort of prestige machine and becomes something with a purpose.
Yeah. And the fascinating part was that DEF CON is the most well-known, most famous conference in China. And we had never done a conference there, but everybody knew about it. And everybody had watched it on YouTube or had heard stories. And so going in, we were sort of the presumed most recognizable. Hack in the Box did a conference in Beijing. I think they did once or twice. And then I think there was another conference that tried, but right now there's none. There was a sort of all foreigners no longer welcome kind of
Hmm.
edict as tensions have heated up between the countries. So I don't think there's any other foreign conferences right now. And with COVID happening, we couldn't go in last year. And with tensions so high this year, and who knows in the future, I don't know if we'll ever be able to go back again. So that might have been a point in time.
Yeah. So going back to the US, what do you think was the influence of DEF CON on the community? I mean, if you look at a lot of the cons that we talked about when we were talking about the
Yeah,
Origin, SummerCon, HoHoCon, those didn't really survive in the same way and size as DEF CON. And so you have all these tens of thousands of people coming together, sharing ideas. What is the impact of that?
right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think SummerCon's gone through a number of organizers. They tried to go commercial for a while, and they moved it to Amsterdam for a while.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there's a con, it's called SummerCon, and it's gone through a bunch of iterations. And I think they're kind of back more to their original roots over the last few years. And PumpCon's always been pretty much just a drinking con and people hanging out. But I think um, I don't know if I'm ADD or not, but I always wanted to improve things. And every year it was like, hey, I bet we could make it better. I bet we could fix this. I bet we could change that. And that mentality just meant I kept expanding things or trying to improve things. Um, and so you ask about the impact. It's really hard being at the center of it to notice the impact because a lot of people won't tell me what they honestly believe. Um, for whatever reason, right? They don't want to offend you, or they think you already know it all, or they don't want to tell you something they think you know. And so I have to sort of infer it through friends and second and third order. Um, but from when I talk to people in the government, not just the U.S. government, other governments, they love it. Like, great. Why do you love it? Like, I said, well, we're surrounded by industry events and funded by industry pushing industry goals. And we really don't have anything from civil society. So what they would call DEF CON civil society because we're not, business
Hmm.
lobbying group or something, or organized out of individual citizens. And they say there's not a lot of input that we can get from civil society on technology issues because everybody's got, Microsoft's pushing their agenda and Mozilla's their agenda. And everybody's got a story to tell, but it's hard to find sort of a group of normal people that know about technology to talk about it. So when you have a talk or when you release like that voting hacking village report, that's really important because it's not a trade publication or it's not an industry publication. That's really interesting. Maybe we could do more of that. If that's really valuable and hackers love solving problems, maybe we'll start doing more of those kinds of things because it's useful and helpful in a way that we didn't even fully understand.
Hmm.
And then what happened though is I realized something was going on when people started putting on their resumes that they were a Black Hat or a DEF CON speaker. And that's when I started thinking like, okay, well, you can't screw this up because if people think you're legit enough to put you down on their resume, that you can't let your standards slack, right? You have to have really high standards or else you're going to piss off all these people that put it down on the resume because they thought it was such an accomplishment to be selected to speak at DEF CON. And that's when it kind of forces you, things like that force you to sort of, okay, I guess we can't fuck around anymore. Like, it's like around DEF CON 5 or 6, a couple of people started getting tattoos of the DEF CON symbol.
Hmm.
That was terrifying. It's like, I might make a misstep. I might step on a landmine and you might hate DEF CON, right? And it's on your arm now. It's on your leg or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
so.
What do you think the future of DEF CON is going to be like? I mean, next year is going to be DEF CON 30, which is a humongous milestone for any type of event. And my question to you is, what do you think is the future? What do you think is the legacy of DEF CON? And what would you want the legacy to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and so on?
Well, I know the next thing we're going to be working on, I alluded to it earlier, which is we've got this idea of DEF CON labs or some sort of DEF CON working with villages or policy folks to try to make all the things that hackers are doing more accessible to the policy people so we can have an impact. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we could have tried, but the policy makers weren't ready. You could show up with all the reports in the world and nobody got it. But recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, policymakers are really starting to get it. And you're really starting to see legislatures around the world making moves in technology, right? And with AI, policy, and everything is going in the right direction. So here's our chance to be useful and show that hackers can make an impact, right? Right to repair, election security, all these areas, automotive. So we're going to probably do something with that. So over the next bunch of years, you'll see maybe DEF CON working with like the AI village to write a report, or the car hacking village, or whatever it is. Try to duplicate what we've done with the vote hacking village. And then the second thing, though, is I'd really like to, over the next 5 or 10 years, really figure out what sort of the end game. I mean, not end game in that ending DEF CON, but an end game of what should it end up looking like? Should it be a foundation? Should we have scholarships? Like you said, the legacy. What is the enduring impact? You know, if I get hit by a bus, I'd love for it to continue in one form or another, but it has to have the structure to do that, and there has to be an overall plan. And one of the things we're thinking about is we're bringing back the DEF CON awards. We did one last year, but we did it in a kind of a rushed, way. And we're really thinking, you know what, the DEF CON awards could work really well with hacker versus infosec. Really thinking about what makes a hacker in the sense of what are the characteristics. It doesn't have to be a hacker in computer security. It could be somebody making the Mars lander work. It could be, a new technology in computer-aided vision. The mentality of a hacker, not bounded by just computer security, and really try to call that out and grow that, and sort of an award or a series of awards for that kind of lateral thinking. Because I think there's a lot of awards for best podcaster and most bug finder and most interesting bug, worst security response. But I'd love to focus a little bit more with our awards on the human and on the traits and characteristics of good hacking, not just who earned the most money on a bug bounty this year. I'd love to create another documentary for DEF CON 30. I was hoping to do it, find somebody who could do the documentary, a crew this year that would come out and look at DEF CON 29 and then shoot at DEF CON 30. But COVID is just making it a nightmare. But we had such fun with Jason Scott's DEF CON documentary from DEF CON 20. I'd love to do one again for DEF CON 30 and see really how much has changed in the last 10 years.
Right. So an open call to, if
Yeah.
there's any filmmakers out there who would like to produce this, they can reach out to us, or they can reach out to DEF CON directly. But on that note, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for spending so much time with this podcast. Absolutely instructional. I'm glad we had a chance to do this. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, you're welcome.